Good morning, friends. Excuse my camera work. I don't have a camera person today, so it's just me. But I still wanted to go on continuing doing the work that I do every Sunday morning with you guys here this morning. And I want to get it started by first of all welcoming you to Freedom Harvest Farms. We have here at Freedom Harvest Farms a 10-acre tract in rural South Texas, kind of near the coast. We're in a Zone 9B region. And over the last, 12 to 15 days, we've gotten at least 10 inches of rain. And we had a very, very good, strong freeze in December. And it's been a really good fruiting and a season. It's been a really good season for growing. And so this is an opportunity for me to say to you guys, let me keep my little camera going right. This is an opportunity for me to share with you guys this idea of observation and interaction. What does that mean? Okay, I'm going to turn this around because it's going to be better for me to be able to show you things today instead of having my face on there. And one of the things you'll notice after a long time of gardening is you'll begin to start to see how things work together. A lot of times, whenever we're in a situation of learning something new, we tend to go into that thing and we spend a lot of our time just simply going right into it and saying, okay, we're humans, we're intellectual, we have knowledge, we've got some information, we're just going to do it, right? And I'm not saying that it's not a good idea to get started, especially when we're talking about gardening, because I can't tell you the number of people that I've talked to that have I've done so much research and I still don't know where to start, right? And so when we're dealing with that kind of thing, we get into a situation where we have, analysis by paralysis. You know what I mean? We're not really getting anything done. We're just doing a lot of research, okay? And so there's a happy balance between going ahead and getting started and then really taking the time to observe and interact, okay? And so after a very long time of growing, you will begin to say, okay, I can look at what I'm running into and I can see what's happening around me. And, simple things like one of the things I noticed this year, I accidentally purchased a bunch of pole beans instead of bushing beans. And I've got winter vines going up here because I had a lot of winter vining squash that were ready to go in the ground when I started planting my cucumbers. I've got cucumbers. And so what I've got is this super heavy trellising. Now, I can see right there that I've got a trellis pole sticking up out of there. And that one thing I could do would be to grab a piece of twine and pull that back up and attach it. And that would help out a little bit with some of this layover situation going on here. But I can also tell very clearly that this isn't the type of thing I want to grow, right? And so if I'm observing and I do this in a way that I begin to learn, how do I want to do it for next season, right? Bear with me on this one today. So how do I want to do it for next season? And when it comes to the production methods that I use, my production methods are a way that I want to be able to get into efficiency as quickly as I possibly can, which means I need to be able to get in and see what's going on inside here a bit easier. This is a really nice way to get into observation, though. I'm not afraid to plant the seeds. I'm not afraid to mess with it. I'm not afraid to watch it. This season is going to not be a bad season of production. I've still got production, but I'm learning from it. And after 20 years of learning and learning and learning, you're able to see that, what you're, hey mom, I love you. You have to stop dinging me now. She's on the other side of the screen. She's actually in a different location, so she's not with me today, but she's dinging me like crazy, telling me she's sorry she's not here. But I'm like, it's no big deal. It's what it is. I'm going to be here doing videos and this is just what it is. And not every Sunday morning am I ever going to have people available. Look at this little bee here. So observation. And the thing about observation is we're looking at what we have already seen and what's working. So the pole bean situation would be great if I was doing just pole beans and then just bushing squash around the bottom. But over here on this side where I've got the cucumbers growing up, I've got bushing beans around the bottom. And so that you can see how this is a much better way of, I can see my cucumbers up here really easily, right? And I don't have all of these beans that are crowding up inside of there. Over here I have a little bit of the same issue, but I didn't have the same type of pulling beans. And so they're a little bit more sparse and thinner in there. Now, other things when it comes to interaction and even interacting with all kinds of people. And I can walk over to another place, but when you talk about observation, right? Observation means I can consistently year after year watch the gardens and see what's working and what's not working. But then when I have an understanding of interacting with people, right? I'm interacting with you here in this space. I'm learning from my interaction with you here in this space. I'm talking to you and we're sharing information, right? As an experienced gardener, I have the ability to share with you, but there are gardeners who have experience that I don't have. And so that's an opportunity for interaction. So permaculture itself isn't just about gardening. It's actually about an entire lifestyle that we use in terms of learning, observing, and interacting this particular principle. We learn these things together. And I can tell you that I will straight up tell people that I've learned everything I ever needed to learn about life in the garden. And that's because I picked up these permaculture techniques and began to observe and interact in a way that I have given it time to really have some space to learn from the interactions that I'm having. Just like an interaction with the changing of camera people that I work with here on my live. All of these types of things. Another interaction that we'll walk over to, and an observation and interaction that we'll walk over to. And here's a good example of something before I get too far. This is a volunteering pumpkin. I've harvested 3 pumpkins off of it. It came up here. The plant itself is not doing super healthy. I'm ready to go ahead and pull that. It's kind of in the way, right? I pulled these pumpkins off of it already. Volunteer means that I allowed it to grow on its own. This is an example of a volunteer as well. Probably the same variety as that other one over there, which means the seeds come up on its own. This is also a volunteer. You can see this nice little white pumpkin here. So if I don't allow things within the permaculture technique to kind of grow, then I don't allow the volunteers to just make their way, then I don't have the ability to observe, like, when does the plant want to grow, okay? My seeds that I let reseed, my flowers that I let reseed. If I allow volunteers to grow, then I get an idea for how is it best for nature rather than how is it best for man. And when I partner with nature rather than partnering with man, I have more of an ability to actually make it easier on myself, more efficient on myself. And why do I particularly want to make it more efficient on myself? Well, because I'm trying to create sustainability. And the more I make it efficient on myself, the more sustainability I can create. Because I'm not spending a lot of energy, I'm not spending a lot of money on gas, I'm not spending a lot of money on fertilizer. My investment is in observation. My investment is interacting with nature and interacting with the other humans around me as well. Let me show you another opportunity for observation. This squash has been really productive. This is yellow squash over here. And it has gotten a lot of rain. I mentioned to you earlier that we've gotten, upwards of 10 inches of rain. So in the beginning, these plants, were really starting to look really unhealthy. You can even see this pumpkin plant here where, it's got a lot of powdery mildew, mosaic mold. It's got pathogens, right? But if I look this direction, I can see that this pumpkin is continuing to grow and it's starting to get green and it's putting on a lot of flowers. And then over this direction, you can see that I've got my zucchinis that were moldy, right? But look how much green is coming off of them. You can see here, a lot of green, right? A lot of green means I start to rebuild. The plant is still healthy. It was able to maintain beyond the mold and mildew issues that it was having up in the closer plant. It just kind of kept growing out further past it, and now it's able to put on some more fruit. In addition to that, it's able to maintain its health in the garden with the insects. People, I mean, that's the first question people want to ask me. How do I kill the insects? Well, it's not about killing the insects, and it's not about killing the pathogens. It's about retaining the health in your soil so that your plants can do what they need to do. But the only way to really understand that is to be able to observe it. You can't see it when you're going through doing the same old routines of tilling up your garden every year. You don't have the ability to see it. And that's the difference between the permaculture techniques. Is within the permaculture techniques, we have the ability to actually observe and interact with things and then make a decision about the best way to handle it, right? Okay, so let's go over to another garden over here, my flower garden. Okay, here's another, before we go too far. I don't know what this volunteer is, but it looks very similar to it. Of course, it looks like a cucumber or a melon, right? But I have been over the past few years observing a bitter melon that comes up all over the garden, and it gets a huge vine. It puts these little bitter melons on it that I don't eat. They grow in a lot of the cotton fields and stuff like that. And so I keep an eye on it and watch the shape of its leaves. And after a while, I've gotten to know the plant well enough to be able to know I can go ahead and pull that plant out, or I can cut it off and feed it to my animals or whatever. But that comes from observation and allowing the weeds to grow. If we don't allow the weeds to grow, we can't get to know what they're going to do to benefit or not benefit us. And one of the other things we can learn during an observation period is we can begin to learn that the plant is actually helping us out, because in a new garden, in a brand new garden, we're not in a position to have a ton of growth, right? We've got bare ground, although I've kept that garden in pretty good condition. Y'all remember seeing it was pretty bare, but now it's got a lot of mulch, it's got a lot of green growth growing on it, and that's what I want. But a lot of gardens are in a place where they don't have a lot of green coverage on that. And if I allow the weeds to grow, then I don't allow my plant to get uncovered. And we'll talk about that in some more of the permaculture principles that we talk about in the next 12 weeks, in the next 11 weeks. But we have talked about it already in the regenerative agriculture, and that is biodiversity, keeping plants to cover the soil, armoring the soil, keeping plant life in the soil. So these are all techniques of regenerative agriculture. Now, this is a garden that I've been observing for since 2020. The very first year we planted okra and cucumbers in it. The second year we actually built the garden and put in irrigation and all of that. And then the third and fourth years I grew in it. And the fifth year I decided that I needed to make some changes in it. This is because of several different types of observations. One thing I can observe is my chickens do really well over here. This is a very protected area. They have lots and lots of seeds and things to eat. So this is a good place for me to bring my chickens in and allow them to go and do the tunnel running up and down the tunnels, right? I also can see that a lot of the flowers that I've put in over the years are taking this space over, and I don't have to put in a lot of things. However, as I've wanted to kind of keep an eye on what's going on inside here, I can look deeper in and see what's still growing in here. And in the past, I've had kale down inside here. I recently put in some nice sunflowers. Now, these sunflowers are having you see this caterpillar right here? This is the Gulf fritillary, I believe. So you would think, oh, you don't want those caterpillars on things eating them. Well, I actually want those caterpillars because they're a really nice, important pollinator in our region, and we want to have that pollinator in our region. So what I have here is a garden that has become something else because I observed it over the years and saw what it could do. I began to understand my interaction with my neighbors. I don't know how many of you know this, but I have had to make some decisions about this garden. One thing is it floods back here. And so last year I noticed my green beans were, even in a drought season, I noticed that my green beans were actually molding. Green beans molding in a drought means there's way too much water going on right here. Okay, so that was an observation. However, I noticed that the herbs and lots of flowers do really, really well in this garden. So those are some things that I watched and became aware of. But then in my interaction with the people around me is something I have to pay attention to. And so my neighbors made some decisions with their yard and some things going on in their yard that don't make me feel comfortable that this garden is any longer a safe place for food production. That it's organic and that it's and it's going to be safe for me to harvest kale and herbs and all of those kinds of things. But I can't know what the best way to observe and interact with other people if I'm not willing to take time and space to figure that stuff out. And so what I've done here, the decision that I made about this garden was that I was going to go ahead and let it become more of a butterfly garden, a flower garden. I do cut a lot of flowers out of here. And I also have put in pumpkins, because pumpkins are summer vining plants, and I feel safe to put those in, and that we can still harvest pumpkins from this garden. In addition to that, because I've begun to observe how many of the herbs and things like that are doing so well inside here, I know that I can take a lot of food out of this garden and feed to my rabbits and my chickens and all of that kind of stuff. So these are things I've begun to observe and use the interactions that I have with what's going on in this garden. And all of these things are required. That's the experience of a season of watching things grow, right? And the thing about it is that if I ever decide for whatever reason that this garden is too much and I need to take it down, then I can take it down. It can be taken down. After a winter, you guys have seen this in the wintertime, it will freeze back. That will happen. I can always come in with weed eaters and mowers and take it down. It's not that big of a deal. And then I can just work to replant it again, because if I want to replant it again. You can see here that I've got some really nice squash, that there's actually a plant taking off over here somewhere. I need to dig in there and find it. Some sunflowers. You can see all of these pretty black-eyed Susans, lots of bee balm, some artichokes still growing over there. This is a weed, okay, or at least weed's relative, but this is one I have observed. It makes a really nice white flower in the summertime that's great for cut flower bundles, and so of course I want to leave that. The other thing about this is that the birds are very happy over here because there's lots of seeds and insects and things like that, the birds to eat. Down here, I told you that I had a lot of good herbs growing down here. Down here, the lemon balm has done really well. It has had a lot of moisture. I've said there's a lot of moisture in this garden. I can tell what plants like a lot of moisture, what plants don't do as well with a lot of moisture. Like the bee balm is not as healthy over here as it would be in a more dry garden, but the lemon balm is doing excellent. Some more lemon balm there. And what I use the lemon balm for at this point, rather than eating it myself, is putting it in my flower arrangements. And it has a very, very nice, healthy fragrance that I can use for that as well. So this is a good thing to observe and take a look at. You know, I've got the yarrow over here that I can use in cut flowers. But you have to, the interaction with other people requires you to make changes that you might not have necessarily wanted to make. And that can be a bit frustrating, but when we begin to take the opportunity to see how nature works in interaction, it doesn't hold on to, it doesn't make a difference, it doesn't spend a lot of time in unforgiveness, it just moves on, right? And so we can learn a lot about having a more peaceful life when we watch how nature handles things. And that's a lot of where my healing has actually come from, because I have been able to observe and interact. I would also say it's extremely important to observe and interact with experienced growers and other gardens. I mentioned last week when I went to Texas A&M University teaching gardens that it's good to visit other gardens. Going to other places and seeing other people's gardens is a good way to observe and to interact with experienced growers that have more experience than you do. So in this garden yesterday, I had a class and I took people around and showed them all the different things that I was doing. And they have a desire to be sustainable food producers up in the Austin area. And so showing them what I've done here, I also gave them the ability to show them what I have learned by all the observations that I've had about how to actually create sustainability in order to actually make money. Because a lot of the production models, the industrial production models that we use, and even the organic production model that we use, doesn't create a sustainable and feasible income unless you are on 10,000 acres of land. So it's not feasible for growers to do this type of work. But when we allow nature, in our observations of how that stuff works, to do its work, then we begin to see how we can make some money back in that in some of those regenerative methods. Observing the bees. A lot of people are telling me they don't have, their squash doesn't seem to be pollinating. And I have noticed that when I lived in the city limits, that was an observation I made, that I would agree that we weren't having a lot of pollinators. But out here on the farm, I have no issues with pollination whatsoever. Everything is getting pollinated. My beautiful tomatoes. I also have nice beehives at the back of the farm. And so all of these bees are taking this pollen back and making honey. Allowing the sunflowers to grow. I've talked for weeks and weeks about the benefits that I've been able to see from having my flowers grow. I talked about it in a class yesterday, but these are all things that I've learned through observation and watching how things interact. Now, interacting with the wildlife, you know, a lot of times we're scared to interact with the wildlife around us. The snakes, the possums, we want to immediately, deer, we want to immediately take them out. The answer that I often give after observation and seeing success is, the best thing you can do is to make sure everybody has food and water. If everybody has food and water, and there's plenty for everyone, then you don't have issues with loss of production. That's a very important part of keeping a sustainable production, to where you have year-round production going on. If you're growing for your food for your family and you want to make sure you always have food for your family, or if you're growing in order to be a sustainable farmer that has the ability to sell some of your produce. But the best way to do that is not to spend money on pest control. The best way to do that is to allow nature, the permanent style and the regenerative style of growth, to occur, and to learn how plants all interact with each other. And so the only way that you can get a good idea of how to really do that stuff is by watching your garden, allowing things to grow, not taking everything down immediately, not mowing everything down, not cutting everything down, not killing everything, watching it. And we really are struggling with the ability to give space for observation. Give space for observation in our gardens, give space for observation in our life. Whenever we're struggling with things, I'm struggling these days with a breakup, a heartbreak. And if I didn't give myself the opportunity to observe what it might be like to have peace and to experience the good things that could come from that, rather than only just the heartbreak, well, then I haven't given it the observation that it needs for me to be able to give it the space to actually heal. And so everything we learn from the garden is everything we learn from our own, that we can learn and carry over and transfer into our own life. Observing the trees. When the trees have been here a long time, and you have the opportunity to talk to somebody who has trees on their property that have been here for 10 years or 20 years or whatever, you have the ability to get a better idea of what works and what doesn't. The pears are okay. They do okay. The reason they don't do better is because of the wind. The wind comes from the south, this direction, really hard. It blows a lot of the blossoms off the trees. The tree itself will set flowers and pears, and it does have quite a few this year. So it's not to say that we don't have them. But the wind, you can see the way the tree gets pushed. So this gives me an idea of understanding where I need to do more with wind protection. It's the same thing that I did more with wind protection over by my chickens as well. Now, this is an observation that was made with trees, and that is the apple tree. I'll tell you that if you're in the sandier part of our area, if you have sandier soil, you would be good to have this particular variety of apple tree because it does set flowers and it does set fruit. The problem with it on the clay soil is it holds too much water and the roots get unhealthy. But that's observation of 10 years. Big peach trees, plum trees, we just simply don't have enough cold down here for them to be successful. And oftentimes people will say, well, we need cold, but then it froze and then my tree died. Well, the reason the tree died is because it wasn't healthy to begin with. And so those are observations we make. Same thing with citrus. Now that we've begun to go on for observing growing in South Texas for 200 years, we begin to know that this region fluctuates too much. It's not quite as subtropical as we want it to be on a regular basis, and so we can't grow as much citrus here as they might be able to grow a little bit more south than we are. The fig trees are a great observation. I've learned that the fig trees love a freeze. It actually heals them and cleans them up. This fig tree has actually grown twice its size since last year. That was always the big one over there on that side. You see that? And this was the smaller one. Of course, it needs to be trimmed out on the inside and cleaned up. But it's a massive tree, and after a good fig season, it's dealing with less, not completely gone, but less of the rust mold, fungus. And it'll keep cleaning that tree out. And with the nice rain and the nice freeze, we get a lot of figs in our area because we have that clay soil. When you put plants in a area where it's like a edge of something, right? Then you can observe what plants are still doing well in pots. And after a few years, you can begin to know, well, I love this Cuban oregano and it grows really nicely, but it freezes in the wintertime. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in a pot so I can put it in my greenhouse in the season. Things that don't do as well, this was in a pot for a very long time. As soon as I put it in the ground, now it's blooming and taking off and huge. Okay, same thing with this lychee plant over here. So you observe things in pots, you put them in the ground, you watch what they're going to do. You might lose things. That's a part of it. People often tell me they kill plants, and I say, I promise you I've killed more plants than you've ever seen live. So I kill a lot of plants. One thing I observed, another observation, I bought this particular celosia plant, this hot pink firecracker up there. I bought it at a farmer's market probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I took the seeds from it and threw them in a pot at the old house. And now every season I grow celosias because of that. I have then observed that that particular variety of seed of celosia is going to reproduce really well and really easily. Watching the water set back here, and knowing what's going to happen with how are my tomatoes going to grow in this garden in back here. This is the first time I've ever grown tomatoes in this garden back here. I got the tomatoes in a good amount of time, but I have a lot of water back here. Is that going to cause me to have blight in my tomatoes? These are things I have to observe. I noticed in the other garden, the flower garden that I told you that I have shifted away from, I was getting blight in my tomato plants every year and they weren't producing well. Now, over here in this garden, yes, I hold a lot of water, but I have lifted my garden up off the ground. I've put a lot of mulch in the ground, and I don't hold quite as much water in here as I did in the other garden. So you can see my nice little tomatoes that are turning red over there, and then some Romas in the back there, and lots of different types of varieties of tomatoes. These are just going to continue to keep producing really nicely. We'll talk more as we talk about observation and interaction with our backyard gardens and how permaculture can really benefit in other ways. I talk a lot about spatial design that we use in permaculture design and how we use our space. So we've got 11 more weeks now where we can spend some time talking about all of the different techniques of permaculture principles that not only help us with our gardening, but also help us with our lifetime, or just our life, or our lifestyle. All right, friends, I had a wonderful day with you. Thank you for bearing with me when I did the camera work myself. It's no big deal. We figure that out each day and we just make it work, right? Each Sunday we make it work. This is 4 years of every Sunday of me mostly never having to do it by myself. And so each Sunday is a different Sunday as we move forward, as we observe and interact with the newness of what's happening in our world right now. I also want to remind you to come out to the garden here on Mondays. I have garden healing. It's usually from about 9 a.m. to noon here at the farm. You're always welcome to come on a Monday about 9 a.m. to noon, and we'll piddle in the garden. I think I'd like to get a little bit of help with doing a little bit of weed eating and kind of playing with this garden over here a little bit along the fence line where the chickens are here. A real simple little project. And then Monday, I launch the 4.38 episode of the podcast. And this week I have my friend who is a licensed professional counselor, Tim Tate, and he comes on and we spend some time talking about trauma and healing. And it's an amazing episode. So I'm extremely excited to share that with you all. And I hope that you have the best week ever. One last thing, don't forget, I'm doing a food as medicine meal planning cooking class on Tuesday, May 30th, okay? So if you have questions about anything I do or am doing, please just DM me. And I expect that I have my website that's getting some redesign effort from my friend LaDonna Rocha, and I expect that it's going to be a little bit easier to see what I'm up to as she gets some work done on my website and cleans it up a little bit and gets me in good shape over there. So check out my website, aislyncampbell.com. If you haven't signed up for my email list, please feel free to sign up for my email list. My goodness, the mosquitoes are insane back here in the backyard. Sign up for my email list. I send out at least once a month an email to kind of let you know the updates of things that are going on. And of course, if you're here with me on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel. That helps me continue to keep putting up great videos on YouTube and to continue to keep doing the work that I do here at Freedom Harvest Farms in the gardens and teaching and sharing everything and all of the gifts that God has shared with me. I look forward to focusing on the permaculture principles over the next 11 weeks, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.